What's up, Houston? Welcome to a live edition of Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. Today promises to be an exciting show. Man, I've got great guests, and we're on for 2 hours. You don't want to miss our discussion on today as we look at gospel music through the eyes of the pastor, in conjunction with the PBS special hosted by Henry Louis Gates on gospel music. We're looking at it today through the lens of the pastor. Now, we've all heard stories about pastors who wanted to learn how to sing and singers who wanted to be pastors and preachers. We got it all covered today. Cross-denominational lines, cross-gender lines. Man, it is going to be an exciting show. You don't want to miss it. Call your family members, call your friends, call your pastor, tell them to tune in live, 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com across the world. Now, just a couple of housekeeping matters before we get started. If you'd like to follow me during the week, you can follow me on IG, Instagram at DZ Cofield. You can follow me on Facebook at DZ Cofield. And you can follow me on X, the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, at, you guessed it, DZ Cofield. I'm super excited to introduce my guest today as we talk about gospel music through the eyes of the pastor. Let me start from my left and work my way around. We have with us Dr. Terrence Grant Malone, who is the senior pastor of the historic St. John Missionary Baptist Church on Emancipation. He has served there for 19 years, moderator of the Fellowship United District Association, and he does some singing and songwriting on his own as well. We're happy to have Dr. Yolande Herron-Palmore, or Dr. Yo, as we're going to call her today. She is the founding co-pastor of Kainos Community Church with her husband, Joe. They served there for 17 years, have since retired. She's currently serving with her husband in an online ministry called Arise Unhinged Encounters, which is live each Thursday morning, 8:30 a.m. Central Time on all platforms. And she's the founder of Restored Peace Ministries, a ministry for women who've suffered trauma and loss. Pastor Chad Stevenson is a recording artist and founding pastor of Believers Chapel Church of God in Christ. He's been the founding pastor there for 7 years. He also appeared with V. Michael McKay in a production called Preachers Who Sing and Singers Who Preach. And last but not least, the one and only Dr. Marcus D. Cosby, senior pastor of the Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church, where he has served for 20 years. I don't know where the time has gone, man. It has been crazy. So let me start off by first giving us a basic definition of gospel music. We're going to look at the various genres and talk about the intersection of gospel music and the church, what it means to the church. Have we gotten off track in terms of shifting more to entertainment as opposed to empowerment and the like? But let me also say, if you have some questions, you can submit your questions to our KTSU Facebook page. You can send those questions in and we'll get them brought into the studio with us and we'll be able to address some of those questions. Now, when we talk about gospel music, the gospel in its simplest definition is the good news. It's the saving message of Jesus Christ, his birth, his death, his resurrection, right? And when we talk about gospel music, literally, we were talking about setting the gospel message to music to inform, educate, and empower for many people who were a functionally illiterate generation. More theology has been taught through hymns than has ever been taught through sermons. And more theology, whether bad or good, has been remembered through songs than have ever been taught and long after sermons have been forgotten. When we talk about gospel music, everybody talks about the father of gospel music, Thomas Dorsey, but there were many women who were the foundation behind the scenes that made gospel music what it was in its early days. And when you look at the top selling artists, the overwhelming majority of them are women in our arena today. And so I'm just excited to have these guests, man, because they come from a variety of perspectives, different denominations, different experiences. We've got Church of God in Christ in the house. We've got Methodism in the house. We've got Baptist in the house, and we've got Baptist-Costal in the house, and everything in between. So let me thank all of our guests for being with us on today. Dr. Palmore, or Dr. Yo, is going to be our resident expert. We all agree.
Yes.
Amen.
Yeah, I'm saying it on the air. Yeah, we
Praise God. Praise God.
She literally came in prepared. And went, no, we wasn't playing. No, we're not playing. Let's talk about gospel music for you as the founder of a church. You're not a musician, right? But I know you recognize the importance of music to the worship experience. Talk about that experience as you and your husband, Joe. Shout out to Pastor Joe, who is listening now. Tell us about what your perspective was and how you approached music when you thought about the starting of Kainos Community Church.
I was spoiled because I was on staff at Brentwood Baptist Church first and then Windsor. So all of them had great music ministries.
Yeah.
We spent probably much more money than we should have on music because we knew that music was an important draw for people to come. And because our church was geared towards the unchurched and dechurched, we knew that it had to be a different kind of musician to deal with the kind of message that we had. But we were able to, we actually went to the clubs and met musicians.
Wow.
And
Okay.
we got a couple of musicians from the club.
Wow.
Actually.
Don't tell it.
I think all of us have, right?
Right?
Yeah.
And we've seen the transformation in their lives by them being there and being in communication with us, seeing how much that, I think nowadays musicians charge so much. And the thing we ran into is that they want to be at your church for X amount of time, then they're going to run to somebody else's church for X amount of time so that they can make at least, I guess, a decent salary
Sure.
to keep going. But that was one of the biggest issues that we had in our church.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I talked to the late Hank Neal many years ago about his going to Windsor Village and what drew him to Windsor. Because Hank was a nationally known recording artist, right? He was singing all over with a group called Joy. And I said, man, what made you go to Windsor? You know, because Windsor at the time was not Windsor today. And he said, man, it was the vision of Pastor Caldwell. That's what locked him in. And he said his starting salary was $150 a week. $150 a week. And I said, Hank, that was no money for a musician and a singer of your caliber. He said, yeah, but it was the vision, man. He said, I locked in with the vision and was blessed over the years as the church began to grow and the ministry began to prosper. He was rewarded accordingly, right? But he said that's where he started, and he started there because of the vision of the pastor. You raise an interesting point, Dr. Yo, because so many times musicians, and we'll talk about this in another setting, but so many times musicians feel almost used by pastors and not seen as people to be ministered to, right? But people to be used in terms of their gifts and their talents. And it's refreshing to hear your testimony of just impacting people's lives and the ability to disciple them, if you will, and to pour into them and help them identify their walk with God.
If they're open to it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so one side of the table, you can't see us right now. Those who are watching via video can see us. I've got the musician pastors on one side, and then I've got the pastors and singers on this side, and then I got the scholar pastor, Dr. Yo, over here holding it down.
The resident scholar.
Yeah. So let's go on this side. Dr. Cosby, you are a nationally and internationally known preacher. Man, people love to hear you share the word of God, and thousands come every week to hear you at the Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church. But many people don't know your ministry journey didn't start behind the pulpit.
Correct.
Started on the organ, on the keyboards. Talk about how that time in your life affected your philosophy of worship as you moved into the preaching ministry and then ultimately into the pastorate.
Sure. So I grew up at Emmanuel Baptist Church, 8301 South Damon Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, 60620, where Dr. L.K. Curry was my pastor. And there at Emmanuel, I began my church service journey doing music. I was choir director for the majority of my time, and when no one else showed up, I'd play the piano or play the organ. But part of that journey was because I had such an affinity to music. And it was just a part of my life's journey. My mother was always singing around the house. And so I just took to music very easily. I was gifted to sing a little bit, so that was a part of my experience, and it was a part of my daily experience. I directed not only our church choir, I directed our district association choir, our state convention choirs, our youth across the state. So it was a part of what I did. My first job in a national church experience was the National Baptist Convention layman's music director. So that's what I did for the first part of my life.
Wow.
And it was there that I began to understand, because of Pastor Curry's teaching especially, the theology that is communicated through music. Pastor Curry was not much of a gospel music fan. He didn't like much gospel music. He appreciated hymns. He appreciated anthems. We'd get a gospel music in, get a gospel song in every now and then, just cause. But he wanted us to think about what we were singing. And as a consequence, that has walked with me throughout my journey. And it is a part of what I still try to communicate today when I deal with music from this perspective. But from that perspective, I thought very soberly about what songs I taught to choirs and what it communicated. It couldn't just be the top 10 from the radio, because that was not always theologically sound.
Right.
And so for me, it was what is this song communicating from a theological, bibliological perspective that can hold people once the benediction has been pronounced, and not just make people feel good while church is going on.
Yeah. Pastor Chad Stevenson, first and foremost, before you get started, tell everybody who your mother is, because folk know your mama, and you've been around gospel music from the time you was in the womb.
Definitely. Cecile Hines, Dr. Cecile Hines, or Carolyn Cecile Hines is my mother. My father was pastor in the late now Pastor Charles L. Stevenson. My grandmother, who was also graduate of Texas Southern University, Dr. Mary Nell Hines, who had the Bible College within the Church of God in Christ after my grandfather, Dr. A.J. Hines, actually started the Bible College, the system of Bible College and Institute, and even carried on for the C.H. Mason College there in ITC in Atlanta, Georgia. And so it's just been a long...
so you was born in this thing for real.
Faye Hines, my aunt Faye Hines, Burnell Hines, who everyone knows her in her line of work as a mortician, but many people remember her as a great choir director. And she had a choir around here, Voices of Youth in Houston, and served my grandfather's church. And then Michael Stevenson, and just the list just goes on and on. They all over the place. They're working. Church
so
work.
I met you years ago as a young artist. You know, you called the church. You said, "Man, Pastor, I'm trying to do this Thanksgiving, celebration concert, man." And man, you had such a gift. And then they said, "Oh man, you hear Chad started a church." and I'm gonna be honest with you. My first reaction was, "Why?"
Right.
Like, does he not know? Dr. Cosby, and Dr. T. Grant Malone, man, the old preachers would tell you, man, if you can do anything else, do it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's my testimony too.
If you can do anything else, do it. But talk about, for you as a gospel artist, how your journey has evolved as you have moved into the pastorate. Now you've been pastor at Believers Chapel for 7 years. Will be 8 years in April. Just talk about that journey, and has your perspective of music changed now that you're on the other side and you're signing the front of the check and not just the back of the check?
Yeah. I think that my perspective of gospel music is somewhat the same. I'm a little bit more particular, but somewhat the same, because my experience is similar to Dr. Cosby in the way that we were trained and brought up in our environments. It caused us to be extremely sensitive to what we were singing and what we were producing and what we did in a worship service. But as a pastoral, the pastoral experience has been one spiritually evolution. Naturally, things have changed. Priorities change. Adjustments happen. Dr. Paul Andrew mentioned something in the beginning when I decided to obey God in doing it. And I told people, pastoring wasn't something that I was just easily ready to jump onto. I ran for about, a good 7 to 8 years. And then I prepared myself for a year before I actually obeyed God and went out and started. But when I did start, Pastor Andrews mentioned something helpful, and he said everything will support that hat, that top hat. And so I sought God of how to let all of the things that he has given me in music ministry help to build up what it is that we're doing in pastoral ministry, and use that as a support and not as a if and, or choosing, should I just do this, should I just do that, but allowing for it to support the goal of the church and of pastoral ministry. So it's been an adjustment to see people's adjustment first, because the people that I'm connected to, they all have to change as I'm changing. And that's something that I had to come into the reality of, but it was smooth.
But before I get to Dr. T. Grant Malone, I want to ask you this question, because the goal of so many people in the music realm is to get in the house. Right? We're going to move folk. We're going to shout folk. We're going to get in the house.
Right.
But as a pastor, that can't be the goal and objective of your ministry.
Right. I just mentioned that today. We are highlighting the scripture in Matthew 21, my house shall be called a house of prayer. And as easy as it could be to create such an atmosphere within our local church to be extremely musically driven and extremely concentrated on just having a lot of fun and having a lot of events, but disregarding the spiritual obligation of the Word of God going forth and maintaining an atmosphere for supernatural things to take place. It has been a challenge and a charge for me, and so I made sure I didn't do that. When we started, it was the expectation. I'm sure a lot of people thought Chad probably gonna have a musical at his church every first
Sunday.
Third Sunday.
He's
gonna have an artist there every month. He's gonna be doing this, and we're still innovatively pushing music in our own environment. We have creative ways that we do everything. We're really good with that, but the goal is the Word of God, and the goal is people's lives being changed, and the goal is people understanding that we are part of a supernatural community and a kingdom of God where he wants to move through the things that we say and the things that we do.
Yeah, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, your community station, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. Dr. T. Grant Malone, as you think about music and you grew up in the church, now pastoring the historic St. John's Baptist Church on Emancipation, how has your perspective on music shifted, if it has shifted, from being lay leader, from being a minister, now to being the pastor in charge? And how do you see music playing a role in spiritual formation of people?
Thank you. I think I like Dr. Cosby and Pastor Stevenson. I grew up directing too. Directed the state choir, the city choir, the district choir, the church choir, and singing, doing everybody's the guest soloist. And then I think that in itself shapes what you believe as the effect of gospel music. I think as we look at what transforms others, we look at what has transformed us. And the gospel music, to such a great degree, hasn't shifted for me. It has shifted. I have not shifted. I have to say that so many things have evolved, but I, like Dr. Curry, still love the hymns and the anthems and the gospel music. And I think that gospel music is a buffet. I think people have to get what works for them. And when you talk about where we are as pastors, I think that is something that we have to keep in mind, that there are different perspectives that people come with. The church, the unchurched, those who know what hymns are. I shall never forget a youth group met, and they asked one of the kids to name a hymn, and the kid said, "Melodies from Heaven," because in their mind, it was what was considered an old song, not necessarily a hymn.
Right.
And so people have associated that with an old song. But I think that to understand, for me, that if somebody's going to be transformed, I've got to first reach them.
Yeah.
I've got to reach them. And I reached them the way I was reached. And there were various individuals with various life stories as to how they were reached through the church, through the music. And the music gets folk first. We can preach all day long, but if the choir ain't there, they ain't coming.
Yeah. And
they want to hear the music, and then thank God that if you got somebody like D.Z. Cofield, Marcus Cosby, Palmore, and Chad Stevens, who can preach the gospel, then it transforms them. I think that the music just plants the seed, and then that preacher ought to give him.
So let's shift to what gospel music is and what gospel music is not. Because I think all of us, maybe with the exception of Chad, he might not be old enough to remember the green hymnals.
Hey, don't play with me. Don't play with me.
Yeah.
I saw a gospel pearl this week. I saw a gospel pearl.
The Baptist Standard Hymnal.
Yes, sir.
And I remember when the new National Baptist Hymnal was published. And there were churches who said, "Man, we're not using that. No, we're standing with the Baptist Standard Hymnal." I remember churches who didn't have drums, wouldn't allow drums to be played in the church. And look, man, we couldn't sing "Oh Happy Day" or nothing off of "Love Alive 1." But not have no beat, no rhythm or nothing like that. And I remember as kids, we sitting in the back, and the youth choir, we want to rock.
Right.
And then the organist was playing. There was a young cat, and he was playing behind the preacher, and he was courting Flashlight.
Wow.
And the old folk were going in, and we were like, "Do they not know they're playing Flashlight?"
Right.
You can't mistake that.
Right. No, right. But again, music is only secular when that's your experience with it, right? So when they hear that boom, 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 it was like, we was back there in the back like, and the pastor was like,
Right.
But let's talk about what gospel music is and what it is not, because I think we would all agree, maybe we won't agree, that all music that is gospel is not church music, right? There are gospel songs now, depending on the genre that you're listening to, rhythm and praise, contemporary, that is great to listen to, can be inspirational, but it becomes more performance-based as opposed to participatory for the congregation. Talk about your experience in that realm of identifying what is and what is not appropriate. Dr. Cosby, for you as a musician, for you as somebody who has a musical ear, you have great musicians, great staff, but over your years, have you ever had to say, "No, we're not going to do that"?
Absolutely. Multiple times. And we've had to do it on every level because, as you just mentioned with regard to the youth, they want to do certain things that will make them happy, that they will enjoy, but it's not always church music. We've had to do it even to the youngest, in the baby choir, the children's choir. We've had to do that because the director chose something wasn't necessarily appropriate for the children themselves. And if it's not age appropriate for the children, it does not make sense for them to sing it if they have no connection to it. They can't sing "I'm Coming Up the Rough Side of the Mountain." That's just not not something for the babies to sing. So we've had to course correct a lot of times. My predecessor, founding pastor of Wheeler Avenue, Reverend William Alexander Lawson, would always say during his pastorate that music is the handmaiden of the gospel, that the music prepares us to receive the seed of the word, to receive the gospel.
Right.
And if it's not ushering us into a place where we are receptive for the word, it's really not doing its job the way it should. So I think that when we think about gospel music in the church, and it's very different from the stage, but when we think about gospel music in the church, we have to think about how does it prepare people to receive the word of God and to live that word, whether it is sung or spoken. And so I think it is one of the responsibilities that we pastors have, and that even ministers of music have. A minister of music is very keenly aware of my desire to ensure that all the music that we sing, all the music that is presented to us in worship is first diverse with regard to how it's sung, what the tempo is, how people relate to it, but is also divinely inspired. So it is a God-breathed song that helps us to have an experience with God while we're singing it, while we're listening to it, and it communicates theological suppositions. It communicates things of the gospel, things from the scriptures, and not, I don't want to call any names. I almost called a name of a song, but I'm not going to do
Lord.
that.
Hold him, Jesus.
Call a name. Call a name.
No, hold him,
No,
Lord. Hold
right
him.
there, that. You get letters. But I think it is necessary for us to always be keenly aware of what the music is doing, because music always moves us.
Right.
Music does something to us emotionally.
Sure.
And that's a great thing. But what is it doing to us cognitively? And I think as we blend head and heart with the receptivity of the music, it's going to make much difference with what kind of disciples are being produced from the church house.
Let's talk a little bit about, and Dr. Yo, I want you to chime in on this. We have seen and heard reported the biblical illiteracy in many of our churches today. And when we talk about the hymns of the church, one of the powerful things about the hymns are this idea that there was a theological density and they told a story, right? You can't read a story, read the first and third chapter and think you got the whole story, right? These hymns were written and they taught theology, and you have to look at verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, verse 4 in order to get the whole story, right? It's not enough to just sing Amazing Grace in verse 1. You got to sing in verse 4 when we've been there 10,000 years, right? And you get that celebration. What did you see in the starting of your church, and as you moved through your pastorate and your church began to grow in its maturity, your expectations of that music ministry? Because even though you may have gone sometimes to a club to get a musician, there was still a necessity for them to deliver a theological content that was correct on Sunday morning to be in support of the ministry that you gave birth to.
We had to course correct too, but we are so out of the box that because we were geared towards the de-churched and unchurched, we were very careful about the church language we used.
Okay.
We were real careful, but the problem was most of the musicians were traditional. So our issue was you're gonna have to open up. We took them to a couple of worship conferences, and I think that had a dramatic effect. We took classes on prophetic worship, and that really transformed several of them. But when they left, or if we dismissed them, it was basically because they could not adjust to, they were very traditional.
Yeah.
Now, the younger ones, they don't know hymns or anything.
Sure.
And a lot of us don't even know that we are quoting scriptures in hymns. You know?
Right.
But we were real intentional about teaching hymns. I grew up Baptist. I'm a PK, a pastor's kid, a Baptist pastor. My mom was a pastor. So that's entrenched in me, the hymn. So we would do a hymn of the month. And we saw that as our responsibility to ground them in that. But at the same time, I I think because we were free, they thought they could sing anything.
Wow.
And we had to curtail some stuff.
So you're free, but you ain't free.
Right.
Listen, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to Real World, Real Talk on your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. Welcome back to Real World, Real Talk. I'm Dr. D.Z. Cofield. We're happy to have you with us for this 2-hour special, the gospel, in particular gospel music, through the eyes of the pastor. Dr. Yo, you were talking when we were off air about the weaponizing of praise and worship. And I want you to share that with our audience because, you know, especially when we talk about worship leaders who do not see themselves as worship facilitators, sometimes they can take an almost combative attitude with the audience, with the congregation, that, you know, y'all not singing enough, you're not moving enough. Talk about your experience with that, because you focused on reaching unchurched, unsaved people, and sometimes de-churched people.
I think if you're not a worshiper yourself, you can't lead people into it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think that was the problem a lot of times. But they would fuss. They would, you know, say, well, if I have to sing it by myself, you know. So one of the things that we said, you need to know the Word of God, because the Word of God will usher people into the presence, you know. And you need to learn how to not make it a us and them kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we had a hard time, especially with traditional musicians and worship leaders. We had a very hard time with that. But we worked on it a lot. We gave them examples. We worked on it a lot. And so what my husband did, he's in theater. So what he did is that we would open worship with what we called psalmists, and they would be positioned throughout the congregation. And they would quote scripture, you know.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then come to the front and then usher in, you know. That was one way that we could do it. I saw on Facebook the other day, it's going viral, this minister of worship, I mean, he browbeated the people, and he was telling them, I don't get paid to do this, you know. I mean, he went through the whole thing, you know.
Wow.
I'll just go home because I'm not going to sit up here and listen, you know. And I was like, wow, you know, what pastor would allow somebody to say that?
Yeah.
But it is difficult.
Yeah, you know, one of the most effective worship facilitators, and I distinguish facilitator from leaders, right? Because some worship leaders are not seeing themselves as facilitators, as helping other people experience God, right? Was an elder at the Friendship Bible Church, Brother Harold. And Brother Harold, man, was facilitating worship, and it was so powerful. I was there preaching, right? And I'm watching this dude, man, because he's like, man, he's getting everybody. He's like, all right, over here. Now, come on, y'all. Yes. Come on, in the presence of God. Yes. And he's just, man, and he's exhorting people, right? And I stood up when it was time for me to preach, and I said, man, I appreciate Brother Harold so much, being such a tremendous worship facilitator, and didn't sing a word.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
The dude never sang. And his wife walked up to me after service. She said, you know what? I never noticed he's not singing.
Wow.
I was so busy singing at his exhortation, I didn't know he wasn't singing. And then she looked at her husband and said, baby, can you sing? And I said to myself, man, that is like the consummate
powerful.
worship facilitator, right?
Exactly.
Pastor Stevenson, as you think about walking in the multiple worlds that you walk in as a gospel music artist, and now as a pastor, a songwriter, a singer, talk about that difference, if there is a difference in your mind, between what you may do as an artist or a songwriter versus what you're looking for and what you need in the church. Because I've heard, for example, our mate here, Gene Moore, shout out to G-Mo, would say, man, Pastor, there's just not a lot of church music out here. like stuff that your choir can sing, you know. Give me your thoughts on that as a pastor and as a recording artist.
As a recording artist, I recognize that this particular industry and the culture that we're in right now, we are submerged with a lot of inspirational music. And because there's so much content that's available immediately through social media, through the internet, a lot of people, and artists specifically, have to fight the temptation of constantly expressing their own personal feelings, their own personal ideas, and their expression through music. And so it's a temptation. It is a very strong temptation.
And define for our audience, when you say inspirational music, what do you mean when you say that?
Music that does have purpose, it does have meaning, it does touch the heart, but it does not specifically and directly connect to the message of Jesus Christ.
Gotcha.
And there's a lot of great music that does do all of those great things, but it's just as powerful as Anita Baker, who will wake you up on a Saturday morning and make you clean your dirty house.
Yes, she will. Yes, she will.
It's just as strong.
Right.
As Sly and the Family Stones. It's just as strong as Earth, Wind, and Fire. It's just as strong as Splash. Like,
right. I got you.
It made you want to move, but it wasn't Jesus. But if you don't move to that, something wrong with you.
Right. Gotcha.
Because as Dr. Cosmo says, music is very, very powerful. So as an artist, you have to fight the temptation with church experience and with gospel music, and that's sort of what I want to touch on when we were talking about the difference between performance and getting participation. If you are preparing a service, a worship environment, a church, for the word of God to go forth, there are times where it might not be participation because the song is more performance-based. If a choir is perfected to sing Change by the Hawkins, the choir, or the audience rather, may not know their part, they may not know the words, but the music is about to speak to them. And because the intent is to minister, the intent is to touch in a supernatural and in a spiritual way because it's tied to the word of God. How do I know what gospel music is? I can feel the power in it. Where's the power coming from? The word. The word provides that power. It's power unto salvation. So if that song is drenched in the power of the word of God, even if you are performing it, it's going to minister. If you are a worship leader or an artist that is in front of a congregation and your desire is to minister to them, even if they don't get with you, if your intent is to operate in power, it's going to do what it needs to do. I never forget singing at a church, local church in Houston, and I worked hard. And I got off the stage, we were sweating, one of my sisters here, I was thinking in my mind, I'm probably never coming back here because we sung so hard, but nobody moved.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until after I got through, the entire church met us in the front, bought everything that I had, came to the table, tears in their eyes. I'm so grateful y'all came. We needed this. We needed that. I'm so grateful. And I'm thinking in my mind, how? Y'all didn't move. I was just up here singing.
Wow.
But I had to challenge myself as an artist in those beginning days that you're not singing for people to tell you you did a good job.
Yeah.
You're singing so that the power of the word and the message would touch their hearts. So it's to override, overlook, challenge. As preachers, we don't preach for people to pat us on the back and say you developed a wonderful hermeneutically and homiletically sound message.
Some of us don't.
Most of us.
Some of us don't.
Us that's trying to please God. We want to make sure we making sense. We want to put it together. We don't want to embarrass nobody. But the truth is, that's not our goal.
Yeah.
Our goals are for lives to be changed. And I think that when artists, as gospel artists, when we are writing music, write them with the idea of not just expressing yourself and not just getting people to move, not just getting them to jam to your music, but getting their lives to be changed at some point by the message and the truth of the word of God.
Yeah. I think, man, first of all, I think you're too young to be that smart.
I'm sorry.
I want to holler at you. I want to throw something at you.
Don't do that.
But listen, but here's what's interesting when you talk about the temptation.
Yes.
Right. And there's almost this assumption that because I am a Christian, everything that I say or put forth is Christ glorifying. Right. Even though it just may be my idea.
It just may be me.
It may be birthed out of my pain. It's not necessarily about Jesus, right? I'm just singing about what I've been through, and I'm just saying what I'm saying, right? Setting it to music, but it may not be God glorifying. Dr. T. Grant Malone, come on, talk about that whole issue of inspiration and gospel and the temptation and guarding that as a pastor. Do you feel the obligation to guard?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that what we were saying is everything has to be theologically based, but it is incumbent upon pastors. And as you talk about this relationship with pastors and gospel music, we've got to sit down with worship leaders. There has to be a reciprocal relationship. Worship leader, pastor, minister of music, pastor, where we have conversations. Taught people make the best people. And those of us who grew up preaching, at one time, there was a time when we watched older preachers walk in with the same colored Bible and the same color this and that. And our job in our mind was to flip the house.
Yeah.
I mean, we walked pews. We did all of these. I did anyway. I laid out. I laid out on the floor.
Good for the soul.
Yeah, but listen. At some point, it got to the point where I realized this ain't what I'm here for.
Yeah.
That's number one.
Yeah.
And so they have to be taught that if the Spirit doesn't do it, it won't be done.
That's right.
And I think that conversation between the pastor and that leader, that facilitator, has to be had because they get frustrated too. And those of us who directed, those of us who have led, have been facilitators, we know it can be rough because you think that your job is to move the people. But it's the Spirit's job to do what He does best.
Yeah.
And I think once we take that off of our worship leaders, because there are a lot of pastors, we say things like, you better get the house right for us. You need to take care of this. And then you got somebody who getting the house right, and what they're saying doesn't have anything to do biblically, theologically. There is no doctrine. There is no foundation for it. But the house is moving.
Yeah.
But no life is changed. You're going back to the spiritual transformation. There is no change in their giving. The stewardship hasn't changed. Their living, their lives hasn't changed. So it's a whole lot of that has to take place with the conversation with the pastor and the leader.
Yeah.
I think that is a piece that we miss because a lot of times, and I'll make this admission, nobody around this table, but there are a lot of pastors, there are a lot of leaders who see people for what they can do and not who they are. Yeah. And I think that our ministers of music, our worship leaders are not just instruments for God to use to move the house, but we have to minister to them. We have to teach them. Some of them, as Dr. Yo said, have come from the club, and we've got to say to them, listen, that's cool, because, when I hear bum, 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 I'm like, oh, that's happy feelings, But at the same token, we've got to say to them, all right, well, let me show you this, a more excellent way. And I think the conversation is what we're missing.
All right, so let me go where angels fear to tread.
Let's go.
I have proposed over the years that the closest relationship that mirrors the relationship between most pastors and musicians in our society is the relationship between a pimp and a prostitute.
Oh, my.
In that, pastors have served as pimps, looking to get as much as they can for as little pay as possible,
Unfortunately.
demanding a level of loyalty
Right.
at the expense of the person's well-being.
I see why angels fear to trod.
And that many musicians are put in the positions of being prostitutes. In that, hey, I'm going over here for $5 more a week, $10 more a week, $50 more a week. I don't agree necessarily with this mission or vision of this pastor. I don't even respect this pastor. I'm just going over there to get the paycheck, right? And one of my best friends in the world who's gone home to be with the Lord played at a church, very prominent church, and he was a minister of music, or the organist, I should say, for 7 to 8 years. And they had a reunion choir, and so everybody's coming back. And so I said to him, I said, hey, man, you going back to play and participate with the reunion choir? He said, I will not. And I said, why not? He had been clean at that point and was preaching. He said, I sat on that organ for 7 years with a cocaine addiction. Pastor knew it, minister of music knew it, and nobody cared enough to confront me. Nobody cared enough to offer me help. As long as I could function in my dysfunction, and I could be on the organ, the chord behind the pastor, I could snort while the preacher was preaching. As long as I got back on that organ to chord behind him when he was closing, He said, that's all they cared about. He said, so I will not be going to the reunion. And I was like, wow. And so to your point and other guests, when we talk about this ministering to, we know the Holy Spirit is the ultimate producer,
right?
But this ministering to the worship leader, this ministering to the musician, this discipling them, this pouring into them, not necessarily because they're going to be with you forever, because everybody has a season, right? But for the kingdom's sake, how do I make sure that I make that happen? Dr. Yo, you had a point you wanted to make.
One of the things that we did is, I know all churches have vision. We had a worship vision. And we would pull together the choirs, ushers, everybody that had to do with worship to make sure that we were all on one page. What is the vision? What are we trying to accomplish in a worship service? And we would teach on the vision. And we would require them at least once a month, worship people, to attend an early Bible study that we did. Right. But I think you're right. You have to train and teach them. Now, one of the complaints we always got about us, if you go to Yolanda Joe's church, you're going to have to confront yourself. Kathy Taylor used to say, they don't want to know all that. You have to confront yourself, but you also going to have to work. You're going to have to think. You're going to have to do some stuff. You're not going to be able to just get away with stuff.
Sure. Let's talk a minute about the battle over worship styles. And has worship and the styles of worship overshadowed the real mission of the church? I've been around long enough to see the transition from hymns and anthems as the study diet in the church to gospel, to contemporary gospel, to rhythm and praise. We even had a stretch, man, where we had gospel hip hop, going on. That never really took firm hold because we didn't even have radio stations that had it formatted. So, people like Idle King and Dawkins and other people early on, despite the success recently of Lecrae, they just didn't have platforms to be able to exercise those gifts and express themselves in that genre. But let's talk just for a moment about worship styles and has it overshadowed the real mission of the church? And let me open it up to anybody who would like to jump in.
I'd love to jump in and say I don't think it has overshadowed. I think that it can be used as a point of sort of confusion as it's helping a group or a body become extremely mixed in their intake as well as their output. And by that I mean if there's already a confusion on atmosphere, if there's already a confusion on theology, if there's already a lacking in certain areas, then the worship style is coming to accommodate whatever that atmosphere that has been set in that house. So if you have a pastor that is more interested in teaching certain ideas that are not necessarily saturated in truth, biblical truth, and they're interested in growing their congregation by using a lot of eisegetical messages and things to just sort of get sort of points across, then their music minister or whoever is in charge of the music for that church is going to pick songs that are conducive for that. And I believe that
so inspirational preaching with inspirational singing,
inspirational music.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes we have, because we're not investigating as much, and people that come to church don't have a lot of time to sort of investigate and observe the root of an issue. But when they come in and they see that it doesn't match what they're used to. If I come from a traditional background with a lot of strong preaching and I come to a service that has a lot of new age thinking, and I see a worship style that's not the one that I come from, all I know is that the music is off. When the music is not necessarily off, the preaching is. And the teaching is. Strong preaching, strong teaching demands strong music. And it's going to happen. If I work for Dr. Malone, Dr. Cosby, Dr. Yolanda, if they're preaching strong, there's no way I can come in and pick some soft worship approach that really doesn't line and match up with the strength of their preaching. It's going to demand it. So I believe that it's just been sort of a mirror image of what's happening at the pulpit. The style is mirroring the preacher.
May I suggest that the pastor needs to be spiritually sensitive enough to set the course for a worship experience and a worship pattern. When I came to Houston, Texas, 1998, I came as the associate pastor of Wheeler Avenue. I've been here almost 26 years now. For 6 years, I was with Pastor Lawson. And it was during that time that the pastor, Pastor Lawson, wanted to change the worship style of the church. Wheeler Avenue had been known for a particular worship style.
Sure.
And Pastor Lawson felt in his own spirit that there needed to be a shift to...
And let's be clear, when we talk about worship styles, it's not good or bad.
Right. It is
different.
the culture of the church.
Yeah.
Because going back to what Pastor Yolanda said, it is the culture of the church. And so there was a certain culture in Wheeler Avenue, and it had been a long-standing culture.
Yeah, and you brought a different culture
True.
Definitely.
to the church.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Pastor Lawson wanted that
Right.
because
He
he
embraced
saw
Right.
that the church needed to shift to stay in at least lockstep with the patterns of the world.
Right.
Yeah.
He was of the patterns of the church universal, the patterns of the church global. And so he knew. So when I got there, he had just appointed a praise team. Now that was something way away from the culture of Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church. They had just appointed a praise team. When I got there in 1998, I got there in June. In September, he appointed me to preach on Sundays, all 4 Sundays of September, on praise, because our church was not accustomed to that kind of experience of worship. And so he told me in September, you take all 4 Sundays and you preach on praise. And then he left town the first Sunday. It was all intentional, all providential, because he wanted the church to become something different. Then he assigned me for the 6 years I was assistant pastor, associate pastor, to have a praise service at night.
Yeah.
And at 6 o'clock every Sunday night, we had what was known as Sunday Night Live. Totally foreign to the culture of the traditional Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church. But Pastor Lawson saw that there was a shift that needed to be made. I think the pastor has to be spiritually sensitive. And as the pastor is spiritually sensitive, especially to the needs of the congregants in that congregation, I think the worship style may change more than once under the pastor's leadership because the world is ever changing, but you are still the same. That's a classic line from the song Order My Steps.
Right.
All right. So that literally suggests that there will be some shifts, some transitions, some transformations that we have to have as pastor, first of all, if we are understanding how God is going to lead, guide, direct this congregation. And we have to be open to whatever God is doing, and then find the people who will work with us to facilitate what God is doing. If it's just what I want to do, you may find yourself in a valley you can't get out of.
That's right.
Yeah. Let me say I had a member of the church come to me on one occasion, and she said, Pastor, I need to talk to you. And I said, okay, what's wrong? She said, there's some stuff going on at this church I don't like. And I said, well, let's meet, because there's some stuff going on here that I don't like either, right? And one of the things she was referring to was that shift in our worship style and our adding various components. And I would tell people, you know, especially for our young people, man, there's Sundays that they're going in and I'm not getting it. I mean, you know, I'm not feeling a thing, but I'm mature enough to know that everything that goes on is not for everybody, but as long as it's God glorifying, because people worship best with what they're most familiar with, right? And, you know, there are times that, man, I want to strike out on a hymn, and I'm just glad I got a musician that can follow me, right? But there's other times, hey, I'm cool with that. Yeah, we can do that. We can do Maverick City. I'm okay with that, you know, and again, just helping people understand that our God is too big
to be in a box.
To be in a box and be limited to one worship style. You're listening to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a moment to continue hour 2 of our discussion, Gospel Music Through the Eyes of the Pastor.
Real World, Real Talk will return on The Choice. 90.9 KTSU. KTSU, your community station.
Welcome back to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and you are listening to the second hour of our conversation with pastors from around our area, across denominational lines, around gospel music through the eyes of the pastor. This is being done in conjunction with the PBS documentary hosted by Henry Louis Gates on gospel music. And we wanted to take the time to talk about gospel music through the lens of the pastor. We have pastors who sing. We've got singers who are now pastoring. And Dr. Yo and I are just pulling up the rear as non-singers. But we just did the best we could in terms of our pastoring. Dr. Terrence Grant Malone is with us. Dr. Yolanda Palmore is with us. Dr. Yo, Pastor Chad Stevenson is with us, and the one and only Dr. Marcus D. Cosby is in the house, and we're excited to have these men and our sister here with us on today. Dr. T. Grant Malone, there was a point that Pastor Chad Stevenson made about pastors and them guiding what that music needs to be, and you wanted to make a point on that.
Heavy the head that wears the crown. As we coalesce, I think that relationship has to be there, and I think that there has to be some submission to being taught, the Word of God, submit to being taught the house doctrine, how the house operates, right. And some interpretation of the Spirit by the musicians. Have to be, as you said, Dr. Cosby, sensitive to what's happening. I don't think that we have a shortage of church music, gospel music, choir music. I've listened to Ricky Dillett. I thank God for the historic St. John Church Choir. I listen to them every Sunday. I think DeFerra, shameless plug, Williams, and that group is great.
Go ahead,
and at the same token, right here, and shameless plug, the Third Ward Mayor, Dr. Marcus D. Cosby in Wheeler Avenue. I listen to My Heavenly Father Watches Over Me.
Yeah.
And I hear how we sang it back at 1283 Cedar Street, Beaumont, Texas. The Reverend Dr. G.W. Daniels is our pastor, our pastor, 60 years. And then I hear Wheeler sing it. Mm-hmm. And the words and the power still strikes me. It is said that when music hits, there is no pain. I believe that the pain leaves us when music hits, but I believe that those words are so powerful that they do not change. My Heavenly Father watches over me. But that relationship, I'm sure, had that keeping that hymn and modernizing the hymn, shall we say, took place with the relationship between you and Leon.
Absolutely.
That conversation took place. Yes, I believe that there is a shift. Yes, I believe that there's a change. Yes, I believe there's evolution and elevation. But this hymn still reaches humanity. Yeah, it's real and it still gets us.
Dr. Yo, you had a question that you asked offline.
What happens when the minister of music or worship has a different vision than the pastor?
So I'm going to ask the musically inclined pastors what they do. See, we don't have a choice. Well, we do have a choice. And I remember several years ago we had what is affectionately known as Black Thursday at the Good Hope Church. The musicians had a meeting and they decided that they did not like the vision of the church. They didn't like the mission of the church. They did not like the musical desire that the pastor had. And I told them, we have members in our church actively coming to church who are over 100 years old. So everything's not going to be top 10.
Right.
It's not going to be bop, diddy, bop, bop, bop. And, they said, well, they didn't like the mission and the vision. And I said, well, if you don't like the mission and the vision, then I'm praying that God helps you find a church where
That's
you
it.
can work with the pastor on one accord. And it was so smooth, it was in the spirit of Dr. Marcus D. Cosby, that they were summarily dismissed.
In the spirit.
Yes. And it was so smooth that some of them called back and said, was I fired?
Was I fired?
What happened?
Was I either
I wasn't
fired?
really sure. It's, oh, no, baby.
Do
you
I
gone.
come back?
Yeah, no. You gone. You gone.
Cut with a butter knife.
Because for me, that relationship has to be on one accord.
Got to be.
Pastor Stevenson, I want to hear your thoughts on what do you do? Now, you're musical. So if your musicians walked out, it's not like you're not going to have music. You can go sit down. Unlike the rest of us on
Not
this
like
end of the
us,
table.
right.
Yeah. You can do that. And Dr. Cosby can do it, although he has no intention of doing it.
Well, he has enough musicians there.
Yeah.
Number two.
But if they all go on strike, he can handle business.
That's right. His presence.
He can handle business.
Yeah. But you use the word to talk about the relationship between pastors
Yes.
and musicians and worship leaders. What was that word?
That word was what Dr. Malone just said. I believe submission is so very necessary. And as it relates to Dr. Yo's question, those that are serving in music have to submit to the leader. They have to want to do it. They can have ideas, but no person in charge or responsible for music should have a vision. They should have ideas, but they...
Wait a minute, man. Hold on.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm going to say it one more time.
Say it again.
No person operating in music should have vision. They should have ideas. The vision is left for the pastor.
Ideals to support the vision.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's my idea.
Yeah.
That's what I feel it should
Yeah.
be. I was always trained. My mother trained this way. My family has trained this way. It's about whose name is on that sign. And if your name is not on that sign, not only do you not get to make decisions, but you don't get to have a feeling about how anything is going on. It's
Lord
not your
Jesus.
responsibility whether or not the service was high or
All
not.
right.
If your name is not on that sign,
Oh,
go sit down.
my.
It's not your responsibility if the crowd was able to enjoy themselves for the last 2 weeks. Did your check go through? That's all we need to ask you about, and go have a seat. It is not your responsibility. The vision is given from God to the leader.
Pastor, yeah.
The leader gives that vision to all supporting ministries, auxiliaries, whatever you want to call them, that's under the hand of his leadership. And that leader is submitting. It still doesn't stop. He's submitting to God.
Yeah.
And the more you submit to the hand and the power of God, it's some stuff you can't bring to your leader, or even in organizations. We talked about serving in national conventions and things of that nature. The dynamics can get really complicated with that.
Lord.
And the politics can get really complicated with that. You can't meet about everything. There's some stuff you got to pray through. There's some stuff you got to just ask God to reveal it to the leader, reveal it to the board, reveal it to those that are making decisions, because they are responsible. And if everyone understands the power of submission, I believe it was Paul that said, submit ye one to another.
Yeah.
I believe he wanted us to understand that
All right,
we have that responsibility to understand that everybody plays their role. Everybody has a role to play, and we're all submitting in obedience to God. And he doesn't ever want you to sing a song better than the pastor can preach. We want to get the pastor where he needs to be, and your job is to push him there.
Lord
And that's
Jesus.
your responsibility. And that's coming from somebody who spent years on the organ, years working with choirs, years working with praise team. My responsibility was never to outshine him. My responsibility was never to out-preach him. And sometimes it would turn into that on that organ, especially in these Kojic environments. We start, you got to watch us, and because we'll take it. But it was never our goal to do that. It was always to push him to where he felt so comfortable and so secure in what the Lord gave him to say that Sunday.
Yeah.
That's so important.
So I want you and Dr. Cosby to talk just for a moment. When we talk about gospel music through the eyes of the pastor, having your vision interpreting the vision of the pastor, right? You all are both pastors now, but you were not always pastors. You were choir directors. You were musicians.
Right.
How did you approach interpreting the pastor's vision musically? And now what do you expect as you ask your musical team to bring forth a kind of thematic alignment around your vision for the church?
Yeah. So I've had a diversity of experiences. I talk about the experience at my home church with Pastor Curry. He had a very sound theological foundation, and he wanted us to build upon it musically. And so we were going to sing the hymns of the church, and we were going to sing all the verses of every hymn, because, as you said earlier, they were telling a story that communicated a theological thought. We were going to sing an anthem that came straight out of the Psalms or came out of the Scriptures, and he wanted that with regularity. If there was a gospel song and he would endure it, it had to be scriptural, it had to be theological. Whereas I go to other congregations where I served in music ministry, and the pastor was like, just take it, do what you need to do, and get us where we need to go. And there are many pastors who are like that.
Sure.
We just need some good music. Keep these people coming. Keep these people happy. Keep these people, clapping. There's that. So I've had those. I've had the bipolar kinds of experiences with regard to how do we do music ministry, and so I take all of that and bring in my musical experiences. When I went to Fisk University, I was a Jubilee singer there, so I got the spirituals in my system, and I was classically trained as a child, and so I knew how to do and read music. So I have all of that, and I bring it to Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church. In the early years when I'm the associate pastor, I'm doing as I'm told, and we're doing music, trying to help facilitate music through music ministry to ensure that the vision of the church is consistently uplifted. When I become pastor, though, it's a whole other thing for me, because now I take all of that, and we have an intergenerational congregation.
Right.
And our mantra is we are intentionally intergenerational.
That's right.
So I want all the generations at Wheeler Avenue
service.
Baptist Church, which means there has to be a diversity of music that is all theologically sound, and that's going to keep people expecting the best of us every time they come. So, yes, we're going to sing a hymn every single Sunday without fail. Doesn't matter what day it is. We're going to sing a hymn.
Amen.
We're going to have praise and worship every Sunday. Doesn't matter what day it is. So we got to do all of that. And I've had to teach, from the pastoral perspective, our people to appreciate more than just what you like.
Right.
I think that is part of my responsibility, is to teach that all of this is to glorify God and to reach an intentionally intergenerational congregation. And even I've had to endure some things I didn't like musically, because you said earlier, because I want a whole congregation to be fed and to leave saying, that was for me.
Yeah.
Buffet.
That was for me, and I'll come back next week, and I'll look forward to seeing and hearing and receiving something that was for me. It was intended for me. So my thinking with regard to music ministry, and I'm grateful that we've had two ministers of music in my pastoral tenure who completely understood that. Hank Neal was the first one. Hank used to always fuss. He said, I've never worked for a musician. And that was the hardest thing for him, because I'd come back at it with music. We'd go back and forth with what music presentation should be. And now Leon Lewis, who's just God's gift to music ministry, he hears and I like what you said, Pastor Chad, he hears my heart with regard to the vision, and he says, okay, we got it. And if I'm doing, and my thing is, all of the music that we sing has to support what I'm preaching.
Right.
I preach series, so you have to support and I asked Leon once, how, because it was an extended series, one of those year-long series. I said, how you going to find music for this all year? And he said, and I quote, Pastor, if we can't find it, we'll just write it. That's what he said.
I love
We'll
that.
just
I
write
love
it. And he is so steeped in Scripture. He understands the Word of God. He came from a church family, a Bible-believing family, so he just writes the music and teaches it to the choir. He's written songs, as other musicians have done, while I'm preaching, and he teaches it during the invitation to support the sermon. And so that is the kind of assistance you need, people who understand vision, and then they have the ideas to support it.
Right.
So you, Chad, you work for pastors. Now you are a pastor. Have you had to have conversations with your musical staff and walk out saying, man, now I know what my pastor felt, or what he was going through, or what he was dealing with?
Yes and no. I say yes, Dr. Cofield, because there were some times where in that level of leadership, you're working with multiple personalities. And then as Pastor Cosby said, you're dealing with multiple desires. People have their own preferences of what they like. Some people like this, some people like that. And so you're having to manage all of that. And so that's when I first learned it. But then on the flip side, I say no, because for anybody that's not pastoring, I'm still going to tell you, you don't know what it is until you get in that seat.
Yes.
I thought I knew from the organ.
Yes.
I thought I knew from being a pastor's kid. I thought I knew from being a grandson of teachers and professors and all that kind of stuff. I still didn't know what all was in it until I got in it.
Yeah.
And that's just the real about it. But I've learned how to keep my ears open, stay learning, stay watchful. And then I think as far as preparation is involved in interpreting that vision, as you were saying before, I'm trying my best. Of course, there's so many. He mentioned Dr. Leon Lewis. He mentioned Hank Neal. We have in our midst Brother Chad Briley in the city of Houston, and so many others that's teaching and structuring and giving information to a lot of music ministers. If we had to simplify it, I believe that most pastors are looking for 3 different areas. They're concerned about what the audience feels when they come in the door. They want to have a certain atmosphere in the house. And I think that pastors are also looking at 2 places: what happens before and what happens after that message. And so if you're wanting to interpret what that pastor wants, look at those 3 things, prioritize those 3 things, and then fill in the blanks with the best fit for your particular house. And then try to keep things simple. I think if we keep things simple on what's real, what's appropriate, what's necessary, what works, I believe you'll be in a safe zone. And I believe it's when we start dealing with those multiple visions, that we sort of get out of the safe zone and we start just trying to find out what I think is going to work. That's a gamble.
Well,
it might not.
If they leave worship while you're preaching, which we had that issue for a long time, they come in, they have no idea what has just happened.
Right.
Right.
So, Dr. Yo, let me ask you this question in regards to worship and the health of not just the church, but the health of the body. You are leading a ministry now, Restored Peace Ministry. You're ministering to women who have suffered trauma and loss. Can you talk about the role that worship plays for you in this new ministry journey for you?
For my dissertation, I wrote about when the saved become free. And I was dealing with the sanctification process and how there has to be an aspect of wholeness. Because you can be saved and just as crazy as can be,
Saved and crazy.
So I had to design something that would address the inner healing, the wholeness. So there is a sense in which they are right when they say when you come to Joe and Yolanda's church, you're going to have to confront yourself, because we do take them through. And especially our preachers. We'll send them to counseling in a minute, and have the counselor report to us what's going on, because if you haven't dealt with your issue, then you're bleeding all over everybody else, and you can't really deal with what's coming in, the people that are coming in. You've got to be well yourself. Now, who determines who's well? We can tell when their wholeness, when they are really connected to God and have a relationship with God, and when they have gone, we can tell exactly when they stopped. You could tell that. And so there is a sense that we did a course. We do a course for leadership. We bring in some psychologists, who help to prepare us and helps us to see what kind of people might be in the congregation.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Powerful,
Dr. Cosby, I want you to talk about the album that Wheeler Avenue did. And why you did it.
Yeah.
What was the thought process behind it? Because it's a tremendous piece, and again, just theologically sound throughout. There's a theological density in that, to the point that I couldn't listen to it just going through all at one time, right? It was like, okay, I can listen to a song, now I got to meditate, hold on, I got to pray, right? Because that song right there was just deep,
Right.
And I found that happening repeatedly. Talk about the album that Wheeler Avenue
Talk about
did.
why nobody else could get their album done because Wheeler Avenue was getting their album done. Talk about that. Talk about.
You have that counselor from Baptist Stevens.
I still got some
Unresolved
PTSD.
issues.
Nobody else could get their album done because we had to wait on Wheeler Avenue because they had a banger coming out.
Therapist, please.
Dr. Yo is here.
So, on our anniversaries, on the decade anniversaries, the 50th anniversary of our church and the 60th, we're now 61 and a half years old. So on our 50th anniversary, we did a recording. And when we turned 60 in 22, we did yet another one. And Minister of Music had a great idea, Pastor Stevenson. Mm-hmm. His idea was to provide churches or the church community with songs that church choirs could sing.
Right.
Yeah.
He said part of the challenge of listening to the radio is that every church choir can't sing much of the songs or the top 10 songs that are pushed and promoted through some of the gospel music radio stations. Mm-hmm. And so his idea...
Especially on the keys that they're recording.
Exactly.
Everybody wants to sing Take Me to the King until they get to the vamp. No, come on, Tamala, man. Come on, get up there. Let's go.
Right.
Tam Jr.
Right. So Leon was like, we need... And this is his... He said we're going to do it. This is in 2 parts. This is part 1 of what he calls chapters and verses. Yeah. All of the music comes from the scriptures. All of it is biblically rooted. You can easily find the biblical verses that correlate to the song. Some of them are hymns, as Dr. Grant Malone just mentioned. My Heavenly Father watches over me. And so we understand from a cognitive perspective that people in church need to hear music that has a biblical foundation that they can sing once it goes off the radio, right? So that was his whole point. And for about 12 or 13 songs, how many's on that album, we've tried to do that, tried to help people to have a good listening experience and a worshipful experience. I'm glad you said, and a meditative experience so that we can...
No, it's an encounter with God. There's no question.
That's our plan. That was our plan. So that the individual can have an encounter with God, and then as churches sing it, congregations can have an encounter with God, and God gets glorified as a consequence of all of it.
Yeah. Dr. T. Grant Malone, as you're looking at the shifts that are occurring in gospel music, how have those shifts impacted what you do on Sunday morning as a pastor?
Again, I think I'll go back to that statement, heavy the head that wears the crown. I think pastors and ministers of music are always thinking, sharing, exchanging the ideas, Pastor Stevenson, once the vision is given, but sharing those ideas. I think, Pastor Cofield, that not only has the music shifted us, but something happened to all of us about 3 years ago. The pandemic shifted us.
That's right.
Okay.
And it shifted us in a way that made us look at worship for what it should have been a long time ago.
Okay.
I think that we have missed the moments, and we didn't maximize the moments. Carpe diem, we got to seize the day. And I think we have the opportunity to do it now. So when I look at the shifts of music, as I go back to what I tell our minister of music, our worship leader, there must be a buffet, intergenerational, something for everybody. Everybody needs to be able to leave with something. One of my members, I was talking about it before we got on tonight, Brad Scarface Jordan invited everybody to come to church. And as we were going into the communion, they started singing, I Thank God for the Blood that came streaming down from me.
Sir.
Brad, with his cup and his bread, started to walk the floor and just started shouting. I said, Brad Scarface Jordan started to walk the floor and start shouting. It didn't matter where he had come from or what genre of music, the blood that still touched him. I think that when we look at people's experiences, that may be a shift in the style, but that word is still the same. And I think that we have to get back to words or songs that deal with Jesus.
That's right.
I mean, people are not talking about heaven. I know they got these songs. I won't mess with nobody tonight.
Don't
but,
do it.
But there are a whole lot of songs that are not scripturally sound. And we talk about these crowns and carrying on, 5 heavenly crowns. And some of the ones we talk about, we ain't going to do nothing with them. We ain't going to wear them. However, we allow people to carry on, as I say. But I think that the word should never change. I think that if there's a shift in the culture, there has to be some stick-to-itiveness within the pastor that says, I got to own, I hate to call out to him, but on Christ, the solid rock I stand.
Those were the songs that kept us.
And they're still keeping us.
And they're still doing
And
it.
I think that we as leaders have to still say to our worship leaders, our ministers of music, our worship pastors, that stuff still works.
Yes.
Maybe we change the beat. Maybe we change the intonations. But the words still matter.
And I think that's the key piece, right? Because what made the hymns was not the music, it was the lyrical content, right? And do we maintain that lyrical content? Do we maintain that message while our delivery methodology may shift?
And the story behind them, Horatio Spafford's, it is
Peace
well,
well.
wind peace like a river. I've lost everything, but I need peace.
Yeah.
And in 2024, in 2023, 2022, 2021, when people were having restless nights, sitting in the house with people they didn't know they didn't like and they'd been married to for years. But then that moment, you have to start singing to yourself, when peace like a river attended my way. I love to hear one of our members, Dr. Jackie Chambers, play that piece. When sorrows like sea, whatever my lot, pandemic, whatever my lot, no job, can't go to work, got a job, but just can't get there. Whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it's still well with my soul.
Yeah.
And I think understanding the background of those scriptures, I was telling you, Dr. Cofield, one of the persons I had a conversation with prior to coming here, Dr. Margaret Pleasant DeRoe, who wrote some of the most profound hymns. Give me a clean heart. That's right out of the scripture.
Yeah.
But I think we've got to say to our people, it's important that we don't lose the word of God amidst the culture.
Yeah.
Because if we do, then we fail to be the church.
Let's take a short break. We'll be back in just a moment. I know we're moving forward, but I want to talk about, after the break, how the pandemic has shifted worship for us. How has it changed worship, if it's changed worship, and what does that look like moving forward? You're listening to Real World, Real Talk on your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. We'll be back in just a moment.
The Black preaching tradition is deeply connected to gospel music. Our singers preach and our preachers sing.
God, we ask that you reinvigorate somebody.
You feel it deep down in your soul. It makes you want to shout. It makes you want to sing.
That's beautiful.
Welcome back to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield. You're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. I want to thank you for joining us on this 2-hour journey around gospel music through the eyes of the pastor. I want to thank all of our guests who have been with us, Dr. Terrence Grant Malone, Dr. Dr. Yolanda Palmore, Pastor Chad Stevenson, who is off to go sing right now, and the one and only Dr. Marcus D. Cosby. Before the break, we were talking about gospel and the pastor and the pandemic. How has the pandemic affected your worship experience and gospel music in general in terms of your worship service? Has it had an impact on it? Let's start with you, Dr. Yo.
I think when the pandemic hit, a pastor called us out of the blue and said, I know, you don't have your church, but nobody's at church in a building right now, and your ministry needs to go forth. And at first we just ignored it, but we started Arise, Unhinge, Encounter actually during the pandemic, and got such a great response of people who were looking for. We were very intentional. We're only 15 minutes, if that. We didn't want to be on there prophesying and doing what everybody else was doing, but we wanted to give a substantive message and some hope, during those times. And we were amazed that even pastors were on there, would come on there. So what we learned is that the outreach broadened when we started streaming, and, when churches started streaming, when we started doing that, we were able to reach people. We have people from Pakistan that literally, when my birthday was last week, they called and videotaped, and they did a cake for me. They did everything for me, that we try to do a mission with them every once in a while. But I saw the vision of the expansion of ministry. Wheeler helped me to see the vision of expansion when they started Wheeler Wherever, because I have family in Minnesota, I have family here, and we all are going to watch Wheeler or go to Wheeler, and we feel like we're part of Wheeler Wherever. So that whole e-member thing that T.D. Jakes was doing for years became real. It became very real. Lastly, the other thing that we noticed is that after COVID, people didn't want to go back to church.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they would call us to do baptisms, to do funerals. We were already doing that anyway. But when you gonna start your Bible study? When you gonna do, and we did not want to conflict with the church, because we believe in the church. But what happened was people started asking us to do things, and so we came up with the idea of becoming personal pastors that lead people to a church, or lead, But our focus is to encourage them to have an encounter with God. That's really our, because you can go to church all you want to and never encounter God.
Right.
So our thing is really about discipleship, mentoring, and getting them to a point, where they're ready to fellowship and be with.
Yeah. Dr. T. Grant Malone?
Intentionality and integrity.
Yeah.
I quote Dr. Joe Sam Ratliff.
Oh, yeah.
When he says, you don't have to be eternal to be everlasting.
That's it.
My dear friends know I do not start anything late, and I do not like to be in any service long. Y'all forgive me. I don't. My patience doesn't tolerate it. And I realize that a lot of people's patience don't tolerate a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
That's the word I'll use. Stuff that was taking place in a lot of our what we called worship experiences. So removing fluff, removing stuff, making sure that we kept the integrity intact of worship and the Word of God, giving people what they need to know, but also being intentional about our time.
Yeah.
This is what we're going to do. And so, I love it that we start at 10 and we're out at 11:15, and folks have run around the church and shouted and got what they needed and worshiped and sang and gave. And I think that prior to the pandemic, we as leaders may have been fooling ourselves to believe that a lot of what we were doing was church.
Yeah, you can take the may out for that sentence.
Well, I just want to be, I want to be cautious here.
No, this is real world, real talk.
Well, folks was lying to themselves, and you don't ask me to do that. People were lying to themselves and doing a lot of stuff that had nothing to do with God.
Yeah.
Had nothing to do with delivering people, had nothing to do with transformation spiritually. And I think that it being intentional, but keeping the integrity intact. We still going to worship God. We're still going to help those who are in need. We're still going to hear the Word of God and learn and grow and study and develop. From the pandemic, some of my brothers and sisters are going to crucify me. We don't have Sunday school. We have Christian education. It worked for us. It works for us. My Bible study was then and is still now only an hour, maybe 45 minutes now, because we get the meat of what is necessary and we leave the rest of the stuff. And I think people appreciate it. In this change in time since the pandemic, a lot of folks picked up a lot of hobbies. They picked up a lot of certainly, children now are doing everything on Sundays, from sports and everything else. So it has tapped into what we used to know as the Lord's Day, as church time. Dr. Cosby, we were talking about prior to this. We went to church all day long, and that has changed tremendously. And so now we're in a position where we got to meet the challenging and the changing times. And so the pandemic has taken us out of a lot of stuff. One other thing I'll add is that there were a lot of people who thought that online worship was the devil. And you know, we had started online worship long prior to the pandemic and found out it was really of God. The majority of our givers were online. They were not in the sanctuary. And a lot of people who encountered God were online. And I think we are confusing ourselves. This is real talk. We are confusing ourselves right now because people who said the church is the body of Christ. You don't have to go to the building. And then they said, well, you need to be in the building. We confusing people, man. What are we, in or out? And I think one of the greatest, some shameless plug for my friend here, you preached a sermon, Be the Church. And I think that we are missed being the church. And I think in this postmodern mood, this mood of religious pluralism, people want us not to act, not to show, but to be the church.
You know, I think what's interesting about your statement, so many people have given up on coming to church. And just having church. And I've told pastors across the country, when we order people to come back, let's be honest, it's for our sake. It's really not for their sake. Like we have our own phobias about preaching to empty pews and empty chairs, right? Right. And you know, but I know for us, and we were, you know, online and we were giving online prior to the pandemic, but it really helped me really focus on what it meant to work to give people an encounter with God if they were not in the building. And what did that look like? And so, you know, we've been really blessed. As Dr. Yo has stated, we have discipleship groups now in 3 or 4 different countries, and they're meeting online with people. They're touching people.
Praise God.
And one of my young men, again, way too young to be this smart. I wanted to tell him, you know, flesh and blood did not reveal it to you. But I said to him, I said, listen, I said, he was in Birmingham. He was part of a life group. And he talked about how meaningful his life group was for him and encouraging him. And I said to him, I said, man, tell me, what would you say to people who complain that you really can't touch a person if you're not in the room with them meeting? And he said, Pastor, he said, here's what I've learned. He said, it doesn't matter whether I'm next to you or on a screen with you. If your heart is closed to me, it's going to be close to me either way. Wow. And I can be sitting next to you, and if you're not open and transparent with me,
powerful,
then it's not going to happen. I said, boy, you too smart. Who was your pastor when you was growing up? Right. But for me, it just gave me another opportunity when we talk about taking hope to the world, that we actually can do that now and inspire people and touch people and interact with people. So they're not just watching us, but they're actually interacting with us. I got to give a shout out to my bonus daughter, Alicia. She's a graduate of Rice University. One of her majors was French, and she was complaining that she couldn't use her French like she wanted to. And as the Lord would have it, 2 weeks later, we had a pastor and his daughters from Senegal come to visit the church. The pastor is translating the services from English into French for his daughters who don't speak English. My wife overheard them and said, you're speaking French. Where are you from? We find out where they're from. Long story short, the pastor says, hey, man, I want to be in this small group thing that y'all are doing, but we're going back to Senegal. My bonus daughter took the curriculum, translated it into French, and led a life group 1:30 in the afternoon. It was 6:30 there, and led them. And one of their service projects was to pray. And they decided to pray for a hospital. Not on the outside, they went to the hospital and went through every room in the hospital and prayed for people and shared the love of God with them. And I was like, man, God, you're amazing. Like, this girl just talked about she can't use her French. She has to translate this entire curriculum into French and then leads the group. And we brought them online. Yeah, we brought them online in the sanctuary on Sunday morning, and she's talking to them in French, translating, and it was absolutely amazing. Dr. Cosby, you have you probably didn't have as far to go as many of us, because with multiple services, you had to keep things streamlined so you can keep people moving in and out of not the sanctuary, the parking lot, right? But talk about how the pandemic has affected you and your thoughts around worship and the like.
So I was the one who had the most significant phobia about preaching in an empty room. I just wasn't feeling it.
Gotcha.
And our church will tell you I wasn't feeling it so much so that for the first 3, 4, 5 months of the pandemic, we played old worship services on Sunday morning.
That's right. You sure did.
Because I wasn't feeling going into an empty room and preaching to a camera. I didn't. And I said, oh, we'll be out of this shortly. When we realized that we weren't going to be out of that pandemic experience shortly, we realized, we got to do something. And the people were like, hey, man, you got to do something.
You got to do something.
You got to do something. We need you to preach. And so we got the small core team in. And I want to go to a little practical piece with regard to our music and worship that we learned fairly quickly. So our praise teams, about 6, 7 people, they took us through the pandemic with excellence.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
stellar, taking us through the pandemic. When we got back, and we were coming back slowly, but when we got back, and we were about 3/4 of the way back, our people were like, okay, we have really appreciated the praise team. We want our choir back. And we had to admit, this congregation, if they're going to be fed the way they need to be fed, they may be telling us something we need to listen to.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the places where we flip the script of what we talked about in the last hour, where the pastor has to be spiritually sensitive to hear from God to make sure that the pastor is leading the people the way God wants them to be led. And then understand, flipping the script, that sometimes the people may just know a few things.
They may be the voice of God.
They may be the voice of God. The folks in our presence.
Yeah.
And God is speaking through them to us. And our people were like, give us choir right now. We want choir. Wow. And when the choir came back, the experiences of worship began to be even more, powerful for us. And so we learned that, everything is seasonal.
Yeah.
Wow.
The praise team was phenomenal for that season. We couldn't have a choir. Praise team blessed us. People were at home worshiping and praising God as the praise team was in the sanctuary, lifting us and leading us. But when we came back, because we're congregational, season changed. And we had to change with that season and realize that maybe we need to hear from the people what is necessary to take us to the next season, whatever that may be, the next iteration of our worship experience.
Wow. Yeah, I know for us, we've seen an increase in the intensity of our congregational worship.
Sure.
Now, we've never been a big choir church, right? But like you, man, we had some soldiers on that praise team that would come in and record and pre-record, and man, they did a tremendous job. But I've noticed now, as we've reset, and I think there was a choice that pastors had, right? You could either hit the pause button and then think you could hit the pause button and come back like you did before the pandemic, or you hit the reset button and say we got to do things differently.
Right.
And we've chosen the latter, and we've seen an intensity in the worship of people recognizing and understanding their personal encounter with God, no longer hiding behind the numbers of people around them, but actually understanding that, there's an audience of one, and you are obligated to give worship to God. Listen, we just have a few minutes, man. Time has gone by so fast.
Really has.
We've talked about gospel music through the eyes of the pastor, the relationship between pastors and musician, the therapeutic nature of music, right? That it soothes and it makes the soul glad, right? But I want to hear your final thoughts. Dr. Yo, let's start with you as our resident expert. She was deemed so.
She was awesome.
She is so.
That's right.
Yes.
As I was thinking about church hurt. And I think COVID gave people a way out who had been hurt by the church. And not just people, but pastors, too.
Yeah.
I'm probably one of them, yeah. And so when I go to Wheeler, I see a lot of folks there from my former churches. And I'll ask, what happened? What happened? And they'll tell me their story about church hurt and all of that, I'm hoping to write a book on post-traumatic church syndrome. I'm working on that as a pastor, what that entails, and trying to give people a solution to how do you work through the church hurt. Because you don't leave McDonald's when they don't get your order right.
Right.
You come back. So how do you work through that so that, and some of it has to do with unrealistic expectations and some of it has to do with their own brokenness themselves. And so I think that's one of the areas that I saw really highlight itself. And Joe and I have been really thinking about how we could address that whole idea of church hurt or even, why I don't go to church, and helping to create intentional communities of believers whether that's a Bible study, a support group, or whatever, for those who need more intimate sessions. Lastly, I think people got isolated during COVID. And so a lot of them are looking for connection. And that's one of the things that fueled Arise Unhinged is we want to connect people to God and to each other, and we didn't want to do it in we've been in mega churches, but we wanted to make a difference in intimate settings. And so that's our goal, is to do intimate settings like with pastors and their spouses, or intimate settings with leaders, or intimate settings with just women or men, to help deal with some of the issues that are going on.
Yeah. Dr. T. Grant Malone, give us some of your final thoughts on today.
Final thought, I've watched St. John for 19 years. I, like Dr. Cosby, walked into a church that was quite traditional in thought, and they perhaps set the course for that style of worship. And they were known as the Silk Stocking Church. Dr. Gloria Mundine, who I pay homage to, who's still with us, led that music ministry when that church had 8,000 members. Dr. Jacqueline Chambers, who's still with us, played for Olivia Branch Walker, and so many others. I look at what they did, and I look at what DeFarrell Williams and Josh Dennison and DeMarcus Taylor, the band, does now. And the song that keeps ringing in my head is "Give Me Jesus." You can have this whole world, but give me Jesus. And as we come to this Black History Month, as we think about what gospel music has done, it has changed our moods. It has changed the movements. Dr. King and Mahalia and all of these movements, and I think it's still changing movements.
Yeah.
But I think one thing we have to be foundational in and get back to is, no matter what we do, gospel music, pastors, artists, all of the above, give the people Jesus. We have nothing else to give. Give them Jesus.
I thought you was going to say, give the people what they want.
No. I was trying to sound spiritual, and he just took me.
He took you into
Lord Jesus, touch him, Father.
Dr. Marcus Cosby, what are some final thoughts you have for us?
I'm drawn to that Old Testament passage where the sons of Issachar understood the times and they knew what Israel should do. I think we pastors who understand the necessity of utilizing music as the handmaiden of the gospel, as Pastor Lawson would say, we need to understand the times and we need to know what our churches, our congregations should do. We have to be spiritually sensitive. We're calling people to be spiritually sensitive. We're preaching to people to be spiritually sensitive. And we have to be the same. We have to be spiritually sensitive as well. And I think we need to make sure that we're promoting music that blesses people in a way that gives them the opportunity to take away from an experience at our congregations what will hold them as the weeks go on. Gospel music, spirituals traditionally helped people who were in a place of pain. If we're talking about the traditional black church has had to deal with pain all the way through her experience, all the way through her journey. And the music we sang took our pain and turned it into hope. And I think what we need to ensure is that although we don't have to sing the same kinds of songs in terms of the mood or the timbre or the tone of the song, I think we do need to make sure that we understand the times that we're in and give the people what you called at the very beginning of this time together, the good news of Jesus Christ through song that's going to help us be able to make it back here next week. Without taking our own lives, literally, without you taking somebody else's life, literally. Yes, Lord. We need to have that experience with God, and which is since our time is about music, in our music, that's going to help us to hold on a little while longer, and not just make us feel good, but make us experience God in a way that we live a life that pleases God and that we are able to keep living even when times are hard on us. And so I think with children of Issachar, the children of these congregations, the pastors of these congregations, got to understand the times and know what we ought to do. And sometimes that's going to be change, pastor, change. Sometimes that's going to be switch, pivot, shift, pastor, shift, pivot, and be okay with it. It does not have to be the same music you sang in the 20th century. There are some songs that have been written in the 24 years of this century that just may bless your church. And I think if you mix all of them now, to be sure, we're still going to sing Blessed Assurance. And I looked up Blessed Assurance a few weeks ago. It's more than 100 years old. And we're still singing Fanny Crosby's song. She died in 1800 something. Wow. Fanny Crosby died then, and we're still singing her music. And so it's good for us. But I think we also ought to incorporate that which can continually be good for us as the days, weeks, months, and years continue to pass. I submit that's what we ought to do, and I think it will bring glory to God and work for the good of God's people.
Well, let me close by saying thank you to all of you who participated in our panel discussion today. It's been a blast, man. I appreciate you all giving us the privilege of your time. And I want to thank all of you who are listening, both near and far. I want to leave you with this idea. The gospel as presented in musical form, a music by which people could be saved without even the preaching of the gospel, because the gospel message was presented in song in a culturally relevant way where people could hear about God, should be the goal of all of us who are in ministry, so that music and word work hand in hand. As you said, Dr. Lawson said that gospel music is the handmaiden of the gospel. And my hope and my prayer is that you see gospel music in a different way. Pastor Stevenson talked about the difference between inspirational music and gospel music. And it's really about one person, and that's Jesus.
Give me Jesus.
And when you hear a whole lot of songs that say a whole lot of great things and you don't hear Jesus in it, it's not a gospel song. It's an inspirational song. It may bless you. It may edify you, but it's not a gospel song, right? But we want to make sure that we're clear in the offering of the gospel message and make sure, as the priests and Levites of old worked hand in hand, that the minister and the musician work hand in hand. I hope you've been blessed by our conversation. I need you to stay tuned for a special presentation beginning at 7 o'clock. V. Michael McKay has a tremendous lineup of song and panelists to talk about gospel music through the lens of gospel artists and gospel musicians. And man, it will bless you. And don't forget about the upcoming PBS special, Gospel Music, hosted by Dr. Henry Louis Gates on your local PBS station. You will be blessed by that as well. The late Vernon John said, if you see a good fight, get in it. I always add, if you don't see a good fight, start one. And the fight for our faith, the fight for our tradition, the fight for those things that help us to remember who God is, so that we become not the best version of ourselves, but the best version of Jesus. That's worth fighting for. Until next time, God bless is my prayer.